her. The Empress did not repeat herself. She didn't need to. Marriage, the Empress had said. Not exile. Not execution. Something worse. Elira's claws curled slightly at her sides. "To a human?" she asked, her voice almost steady, almost. A ripple of unease spread through the court. Even the generals looked away, because everyone knew what that meant. Humans. The word itself carried a quiet, uncomfortable weight. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy, not the fastest, not the most advanced. In fact, by most measurable standards, they were inferior, short-lived, fragile, emotionally unstable. And yet, no one laughed when humans were mentioned, because humans didn't behave like prey. They didn't behave like anything that made sense. "They are unpredictable," one scholar had once said before mysteriously disappearing. "They endure beyond reason." Elira swallowed slowly. "You would bind me to one of them?" The Empress leaned forward, her expression cold, unmoving. "You have failed this empire." The accusation struck harder than any blade. Elira's jaw tightened. She had lost a border system, yes, but she had saved 3 others. She had protected millions. It hadn't been enough. "In accordance with our laws," the Empress continued, "you will be stripped of command and given in union to a human male." A pause. Then, softer, more dangerous. "Consider it mercy." The court remained silent. Not one voice rose in her defense. Because this wasn't just punishment. It was a message. Elira, pride of the Empire, reduced to a warning. Her gaze dropped for a fraction of a second. Then she straightened. "If that is your will," she said. But deep inside, something cold and unfamiliar settled into her chest. Fear. The docking bay was colder than she expected. Or perhaps it only felt that way. Elira stood at the observation platform, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Behind her, a handful of guards lingered at a careful distance, as if proximity alone might somehow implicate them in her fate. The massive doors began to open. "Princess," one of the attendants said quietly, "you are not required to." "I will see him," Elira cut in. She had faced warlords, beasts, entire fleets. She would not hide from a single human, even if every instinct told her she should. The ship that entered the bay was unimpressive, small, scarred, functional. No grand display, no advanced weapon signatures lighting up the scanners. Just metal, worn and silent. "That's it," one guard muttered under his breath. Elira didn't respond, because something about it felt wrong. The hatch hissed open, and for a moment, nothing happened. No movement, no sound, just silence stretching too long. Then, a figure stepped out. Human, tall, but not towering, broad, but not armored like a warrior of her kind. No visible weapons, no escort. He walked forward alone, calmly, like he didn't notice the dozens of armed soldiers watching him, like he didn't care. Elira's eyes narrowed. This was not what she expected. Humans were supposed to be nervous, reactive, emotional. This one wasn't. He stopped a short distance away and looked directly at her. No bow, no hesitation, just eye contact, steady, unflinching. The guards shifted uneasily. One even raised his weapon slightly, just in case. The human didn't react. didn't even glance at them. His attention stayed on Aelira. "You're the princess," he said. His voice was low, controlled, not a question. Aelira felt something tighten in her chest. "You will address me properly," she replied coldly. A pause. Then, "All right," he said simply. No apology. No fear. Just acceptance. Like her authority meant nothing to him, but he was choosing to acknowledge it anyway. That was worse. Much worse. Aelira took a step forward. "You understand what this is?" she asked. "Yes." No hesitation. "And you accept it?" Another pause. Not uncertainty. Consideration. Then, "I do." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Aelira studied him carefully now. His posture, his breathing, his eyes. Nothing about him matched the reports. There was no instability, no visible weakness. Only control. Too much control. "What is your name, human?" she asked. For the first time, something shifted. Not fear, not arrogance. Something deeper. "Ethan," he said. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it felt like it should. A sudden clang echoed through the docking bay. One of the overhead cables snapped loose, sending a heavy cargo unit crashing down from above, straight toward Aelira. It happened too fast. Even her enhanced reflexes weren't enough. She turned. Too late. And then, a force slammed into her, knocking her sideways. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Metal screamed as the cargo unit hit the ground where she had been standing. Silence. For half a second. Then chaos erupted. Guards shouting. Weapons raised. Aelira blinked, disoriented, and realized someone was still holding her, steadying her. She looked up. "Ethan." He released her immediately and stepped back, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just moved faster than trained soldiers could react, as if he hadn't just saved her life. The guards surrounded them instantly, weapons aimed at him. "Step away from the princess." Ethan raised his hands slightly. Not in surrender. Just compliance. "I already did," he said. Aelira stared at him, her mind racing. The timing, the speed, the precision. That wasn't luck. That wasn't instinct. That was training. The kind of training you only got from surviving things that should have killed you. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "You knew it was going to fall." Ethan met her gaze again, and for the first time, there was something dangerous in his eyes. Not violence, not aggression. Certainty. "I had a feeling," he said. Aelira felt that cold sensation return. Stronger now. He shouldn't have been able to do that. He shouldn't have moved like that. He shouldn't have remained so calm. Everything about him was wrong. Everything she had been told about humans didn't match what she was seeing. And as the guards slowly lowered their weapons, uncertain now, hesitant, Aelira realized something far more unsettling than fear. This wasn't a punishment. This was a mistake. A massive one. Because the human standing in front of her wasn't weak. And for the first time since the sentence was given, Aelira wondered if the Empire had just done something it couldn't undo. The court expected blood. They didn't get it. Instead, they got silence. Aelira stood at the head of the grand hall, her posture flawless, her expression carved from ice. Beside her, where a consort should stand, was Ethan, unarmed, unarmored, unbothered. It had been 3 cycles since the docking bay incident, and the story had already spread across the capital. The human moved before the guards. The human saved the princess. The human didn't even flinch. That last part disturbed them the most, because fear was expected. Fear was normal. Fear meant control. And Ethan didn't seem to understand that. "Stand straight," Alyra murmured under her breath. "I am standing straight," Ethan replied quietly. She didn't look at him. "Then at least pretend you care where you are." "I do." That made her pause. Slowly, she turned her head just enough to study him again. Same calm expression. Same steady breathing. No signs of stress. No tension in his muscles. Nothing. "You're in the Imperial Court," she said, "surrounded by beings who could kill you before you blink." Ethan's gaze flicked briefly across the chamber, taking in the towering nobles, the armored guards, the sharp glances filled with disdain. Then he looked back ahead. "I noticed." Alyra narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't concern you?" A faint shrug. "It does," he said. "Just not in the way you think." Before she could press further, a voice echoed across the hall. "Ah, the human." The words dripped with amusement. Lord Verex stepped forward from the ranks of nobles, his elongated frame coiling with predatory grace. His reputation was well earned, brilliant, ruthless, and deeply loyal to the Empress. He was also watching Ethan like a scientist might observe a specimen. Dangerously curious. "I must admit," Verex continued, circling slowly, "I expected something less composed." Ethan didn't move. Didn't respond. Alyra felt tension ripple through the room. This was a test. "And yet," Verex said, stopping directly in front of him, "you stand here as if you belong." "I'm standing where I was told to stand," Ethan replied. Polite. Neutral. Infuriating. A few nobles scoffed. Verex smiled slightly. "Do you know what happens to creatures that forget their place?" "Yes." That answer came too quickly, too evenly. Verex's smile sharpened. "Then perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your understanding." Without warning, he struck. Fast. Faster than most in the room could track. A blade of energy formed along his arm, slicing toward Ethan's throat, and stopped. Not because Verex hesitated, because Ethan moved. Just enough. A slight shift of his head. A precise step back. The blade passed through empty air. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Ethan didn't counterattack. Didn't reach for a weapon. He simply reset his stance. Like nothing had happened. Verex froze for a fraction of a second, then attacked again. This time faster. A flurry of strikes, each one calculated to kill. And each one missed. Ethan moved with minimal effort. No wasted motion. No panic. Just small, efficient adjustments. Like he had already seen every strike before it happened. Alyra's heart began to pound. This wasn't luck. This wasn't instinct. This was something else. Something trained. Something honed. Enough. The single word cut through the tension like a blade. The Empress. Verex stopped immediately, stepping back, though his eyes never left Ethan. The court was silent again. But it was a different silence now. Heavier. Uncertain. "Interesting," the Empress said, her gaze fixed on the human. "Very interesting." Ethan said nothing. Did nothing. just stood there, calm, controlled, unreadable. Alira felt it again, that cold realization creeping into her thoughts. This wasn't normal. Even the Empire's elite warriors couldn't move like that without effort, without strain, without showing something. And yet, "Leave us," the Empress commanded. The court began to disperse, though many lingered just long enough to steal one last look at the human who wasn't supposed to matter. Verex was the last to go. He paused beside Alira, his voice low. "Be careful, Princess," he said. "That one is not what he pretends to be." Alira didn't respond, because for once she agreed. Later, in the private quarters assigned to them, the silence felt different, less oppressive, more dangerous. Alira stood near the window, overlooking the sprawling city below. Lights stretched endlessly across the horizon. Order, control, power. Everything her empire prided itself on. Behind her, Ethan sat, relaxed, like he belonged there. "You embarrassed them," she said finally. "I didn't do anything," he replied. "That's the problem." She turned to face him fully now. "What are you?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Human." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Answer like that," she snapped. "I've read your species profiles. I've studied your history. Nothing about you matches it." A pause. Then, "Most of it's wrong," Ethan said. Alira stepped closer. "Then explain it." He watched her for a moment. Really watched her. Measuring. Deciding. "You think humans are weak," he said. "Yes." "You think we're unstable." "Yes." "You think we don't belong in a galaxy like this." Her jaw tightened. "Yes." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good," he said. The word caught her off guard. "Good," she repeated. "Yeah." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Because if that's what your enemies think too," he said quietly, "they're going to make a lot of mistakes." Alira felt a chill run through her. Not from fear. From understanding. "You're hiding something," she said. Ethan didn't deny it. "Everyone hides something," he replied. "Not like you." Silence. Then, a distant alarm echoed through the city. Low at first. Then rising. Urgent. Alira's head snapped toward the window. "That's not a drill," she said. Ethan was already on his feet. The calm hadn't left him, but something else had taken its place. Focus. Sharp. Immediate. "What is it?" he asked. Alira's expression darkened as the alert signals intensified. "Border defense just activated," she said. "That only happens if—" A second alarm cut her off. Louder. More desperate. Her blood ran cold. "If we're under attack." Ethan didn't react with fear. Didn't hesitate. He just looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he smiled. Not kindly. Not reassuringly. But like someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Good," he said softly. Alira's breath caught. Because suddenly, she understood. This wasn't where the human would break. This was where he would begin. And that terrified her far more than anything else. The alarms screamed across the capital. Red lights flashed, signaling the impossible. Enemy fleets had breached the outer defenses. Alira raced through the palace corridors, guards at her heels, as reports poured in. Fleet signatures appearing where none should have been, multiple breaches across the borders. Nothing added up. "They're already inside the outer defense ring?" she demanded. "Yes, Princess," an officer stammered. "We don't know how they bypassed detection." "They planned this," she said coldly. Ethan walked beside her, calm, observant, unshaken by chaos that would have paralyzed anyone else. "What do you see?" she asked. "Coordinated entry points," he said. "Not random. They're forcing you to split your forces. Once your fleet is divided, they isolate and destroy each section." Aelira felt a chill. "They're baiting us." "Exactly," Ethan replied. "And you're about to fall into the trap, unless you follow my instructions." She turned sharply. "And what do you suggest?" "Hold the fleet," he said. "What?" "That will leave the outer defenses exposed." "They already are. Moving your fleet won't save them. It'll just cost you everything else." Aelira hesitated. Every instinct screamed to respond. Every strategist she'd trained with would have struck immediately. But the look in Ethan's eyes told her this wasn't instinct. This was calculation, experience, survival. "Open a secure channel to Central Command," she ordered. "Hold your positions. Do not redeploy until further notice." The command officers hesitated but obeyed. Every second that passed confirmed her growing trust in the human beside her. Minutes later, the first wave of intruders breached the city. Elite strike teams moved with lethal precision, expecting panic and chaos. Instead, the palace seemed deserted, halls eerily empty, and defenders held their ground. Ethan's subtle gestures directed squads through side corridors, isolating intruders in narrow passages. Doors locked remotely, traps triggered, and illusions of reinforcements created confusion. Every enemy step played into the human's hands. Aelira watched, breathless. "They're surrendering?" "No," Ethan said. "They're recalculating, and they're making mistakes." Then came the second wave, bigger, faster, more brutal. They thought the first failure was fluke. Now they pushed harder. Ethan moved like a shadow among defenders, not attacking himself, but guiding every squad, every weapon, every trap, like a master orchestrating a battle from the shadows. The enemy command ship attempted to coordinate remotely, only to be struck by a precise countermeasure, jamming signals and targeted strikes leaving them in disarray. Panic spread through their ranks. Confusion turned into chaos. Aelira's chest tightened, but she followed his lead. "You've never lost a battle, have you?" Ethan's eyes were steady. "Humans survive. That's different from winning." "But yes, in situations like this, we usually do." Aelira realized the truth she had been avoiding. Humans weren't weak. They weren't expendable. They were survivors. And Ethan was proof. With the palace secured and enemy forces scattered, she knew one thing for certain. The Empire's punishment had unleashed something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The first wave of enemy strike teams breached the central halls of the capital. Panic was inevitable. Guards scattered, alarms blared, civilians screamed, but Aelira's orders rang sharper than chaos. "Hold your positions. Do not engage until instructed." Her voice carried through the palace corridors, steady, commanding. It should have calmed the defenders. Instead, they hesitated, eyes darting between the intruders and the calm human standing beside their princess. Ethan moved among them, not attacking, not shouting, just watching, calculating. Aelira followed his gaze, noticing how he assessed every angle, every doorway, every potential point of vulnerability the intruders might exploit. It was unnerving how calm he appeared, even as explosions shook the outer walls and screams echoed from the courtyard. "You're "Enjoying this," she said under her breath. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her. "I'm not enjoying anything," he said quietly. "I'm observing. And when the time comes, we will exploit every mistake they make." Alira's pulse quickened. Exploit their mistakes? These weren't amateur raiders. These were highly trained enemy specialists, bred for war, selected for cunning and ferocity. "You think we can beat them?" she asked, skeptical despite her pride. "I don't think," he replied. "I know." The first group of attackers moved toward the command sector. They expected resistance, but the palace seemed eerily abandoned, empty corridors creating the illusion of weakness. Many pressed forward too fast, chasing shadows, scanning for targets that weren't there. And that was when Ethan acted. A subtle hand gesture, a quiet word under his breath. Guards obeyed instinctively, following him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't orders. It was trust, strange and immediate. The intruders had overextended themselves. They hadn't anticipated that the weak human would manipulate the battlefield without a weapon, without a fleet in motion. Alira felt her heart race as she watched the first trap unfold. The enemy moved into the lower hallways of the palace, their communications jammed just enough that they couldn't coordinate effectively. At the same moment, Ethan guided squads of defenders through secret passages, isolating the invaders, cutting off exits, and creating choke points. It was surgical, precise, devastating. By the time the attackers realized something was wrong, it was too late. One by one, teams were trapped. Retreat was impossible. They panicked. They faltered. And the humans, and the loyal guards following Ethan's quiet lead, struck decisively, eliminating them with efficiency that shocked the surviving enemy. Alira's breath caught. "They're surrendering," she whispered. "No," Ethan said softly, eyes scanning the remaining halls. "They're recalculating, and they will make mistakes." He was right. The enemy commanders were accustomed to brute force. They had never faced this type of patience, this level of foresight. Every attack they launched now was countered, not with blind aggression, but with anticipation, precision, and adaptability. Alira realized that the humans' famed unpredictability wasn't weakness. It was a weapon, a living, calculating weapon that could survive situations even the Empire's best strategists deemed hopeless. "Princess," Ethan said, approaching her, voice calm but firm, "prepare the central defense grid. Initiate traps. Use everything the palace offers." She nodded, awed by how natural the command felt when given by him. As she worked the controls, she glanced at him again. You plan to win this without even leaving the palace?" "Not without leaving," he said. "I plan to win this with what's already here." And then the second wave arrived. Larger, faster, more brutal. The enemy had adapted, attempting to overwhelm the defenses that Ethan had so carefully preserved. Alira's stomach twisted. This wave could succeed where the first had failed. She tightened her fists, preparing for the worst. But Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He moved forward, orchestrating defenders like a conductor guiding a symphony. Each squad, each weapon, each barricade acted in unison. The enemy, despite their numbers, fell into the carefully constructed traps, corridors too narrow for their units to maneuver, doors locked remotely, surveillance projections creating illusions of reinforcements that didn't exist. And then, in one stroke, the tide turned. The enemy command ship, attempting to coordinate their forces remotely, was struck by a calculated counterattack. A signal jam, a targeted strike by a single defense drone, guided perfectly by Ethan's orders. The result? Chaos. Enemy units lost coordination. Panic spread faster than strategy. Communication lines collapsed. And just like that, the seemingly unstoppable attackers were fighting each other in confusion, leaving themselves vulnerable. Ailira felt a thrill she hadn't allowed herself in decades of Imperial life. "You've never lost, have you?" she asked him. Ethan's expression didn't change. "Humans survive. That's different from winning. But yes, in situations like this, we usually do." She blinked, realizing the truth. Humans weren't weak. They weren't fragile. They weren't the inferior species the Empire had dismissed for centuries. They were survivors. And Ethan was living proof. By the time the dust settled, the palace had survived, the invading forces had been shattered, and the surviving enemy troops had retreated, humiliated, disorganized, and terrified of what they had underestimated. Ailira surveyed the battlefield, breathing heavily. She turned to Ethan. You just dismantled them." "They made it easy," he said simply. "They underestimated us. That's the biggest mistake anyone can make against humans." Ailira's gaze hardened. She realized the truth she had been avoiding. The Empire had punished her, thinking she was weak, by giving her a human groom. And instead, they had unleashed something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Ethan turned to her, calm, collected, yet undeniably imposing. "They think this was just a human saving a princess," he said quietly. "They don't know it's the start of a reckoning." Ailira's chest tightened. She felt something stir, a mixture of awe, fear, and trust. Because the human she had been forced to marry was not only capable of surviving the impossible, he could change the impossible entirely. And in that moment she knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had no idea what it had just done. The echoes of battle still rattled the palace corridors. Ailira moved through the command hall, her eyes scanning the aftermath. Smoke rose from scorched walls. Alarms blinked red. Guards and staff checked their stations, shaken but alive. And in the center of it all stood Ethan, calm, imposing, silent. The Empire had sent its elite to punish her, to humiliate her, to show her and the galaxy that humans were weak, expendable, and irrelevant. They had failed spectacularly. Ailira's mind raced, replaying every moment from the docking bay to the chaos of the last few hours. Every prediction, every calculation she had made, had been upended by him. By a human. "You've changed everything," she said softly, her voice carrying more awe than she intended. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He surveyed the screens, watching enemy movements on the fringes, remnants of what should have been overwhelming fleets now scattered and disorganized. "They thought they were clever," he said finally. "They assumed we would panic. They assumed weakness. They assumed humans wouldn't survive the first strike." "They were wrong," Ailira said. Her gaze shifted to him. "But this is just the beginning. The other empires, our neighbors, they'll hear of this. They'll know we were almost destroyed, and yet we survived. How will they respond?" Ethan's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. "They'll be cautious, afraid, and rightfully so. Humans don't fight like anyone expects. And now, they know what happens when they try to underestimate us." Ailira's lips parted in a silent realization. The truth hit harder than any blow from the enemy. The Empire had thought they were punishing her, giving her a human groom as a mark of shame. They had unleashed humanity. Ailira turned to the screens, watching the remnants of the enemy retreat into the void. Every move had been anticipated, every strike countered. She had seen the humans in action before, during simulations, during training, but never like this. never against an enemy who had underestimated them completely. "They'll spread stories," she said. "They'll call this a miracle, a fluke, a human saving a princess." Ethan's small smile was chilling in its simplicity. "Let them call it what they want. The lesson won't be lost on the galaxy. They'll learn to fear humans now." Aelira felt a shiver of something unfamiliar. Respect. Or perhaps even admiration. The human she had feared, been forced to marry, had just turned the Empire on its head. And she realized something else. She wasn't afraid anymore, because she had learned to trust him. The distant sounds of retreating ships faded, replaced by the hum of palace systems coming back online. Command officers and guards began to coordinate repairs, secure defenses, and account for losses. And still, Ethan stood at the center, quiet, surveying the aftermath. "Princess," he said after a moment, "you need to address the council. They need direction. They need to see that surviving isn't enough, that the galaxy will now respect humans, or regret it." Aelira nodded. She straightened, feeling the weight of authority settle comfortably on her shoulders once again. "Yes," she said. "They need to understand." Together, they walked toward the council chamber. The corridors that had been filled with panic hours before now seemed almost serene, yet every step carried the knowledge of what had just occurred. In the chamber, the council members had assembled, their faces pale, eyes wide, mouths opening and closing without words. They had expected humiliation. Instead, they were faced with victory, a victory orchestrated by a human. "Report," Aelira said sharply. Her voice commanded attention, and the room fell silent. Officers explained the situation, detailing the enemy's overextension, the traps that had been exploited, and the precision with which the counterattack had been executed. Each word underscored the truth. The Empire had survived because of the human beside her. Aelira turned to Ethan. "You will speak." He stepped forward, his presence alone silencing murmurs. He spoke calmly, clearly, and with authority that seemed to emanate from something older than the Empire itself. "The enemy assumed weakness. They assumed fear. They were wrong," Ethan said. "Humans are survivors. We endure. We adapt. And we win when we are underestimated." A wave of stunned silence swept the council. They had never heard anyone speak like that, especially a human, and especially not in their imperial court. Aelira felt a spark of pride. This was no longer punishment. This was revelation. The room finally erupted in controlled applause, some hesitant, some genuine. Fear had shifted. Respect had taken its place. And beyond the walls of the palace, news of the battle would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Rival empires, allies, and opportunists alike would take note. They would calculate, reconsider, and most importantly, they would respect humans from this day forward. Aelira looked at Ethan. His calm, focused expression remained, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "They called this a punishment," she said softly. "They thought giving me a human would be humiliation." "They were wrong," Ethan replied. "They unleashed a force the galaxy wasn't ready for," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly." For the first time in centuries, the Empire and the galaxy understood a simple truth. Humans were not weak. They were not expendable. They were a force to be reckoned with, and anyone who thought otherwise would soon regret it. Aelira's gaze hardened, and for the first time since her sentence was pronounced, she felt complete. She had survived. She had commanded. She had witnessed what she once feared, and now trusted. And beside her, The human she had been forced to marry stood unshaken, untouchable and unstoppable. The galaxy's biggest mistake had just been made. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.